Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, the third and final night of our Women's Prize for Fiction Virtual Shortlist Festival. It's been wonderful to have so many of you joining us, and we love the fact that you put in the box where you are from all over the world, and calling out to everybody who's been here all week, and maybe one or two of you who are just coming to the sessions for the first time. You all know the drill, but I'm just going to say it anyway. So the Women's Prize was set up to amplify and to honour and to celebrate amazing writing by women from all over the world. It was set up with a spirit of diversity, with a spirit of ambition, with a sense of getting brilliant novels by women into the hands of readers who'd love them. We are now 26, and we had obviously hoped to be announcing the winner of the 26th Women's Prize for Fiction in a couple of weeks' time. Some of you may have heard the news yesterday, but we have now decided to hold the announcement and the award ceremony until the 8th of September. So there will be no announcement till the 8th of September. And for those of you who were coming to events on the 7th of September, the day before, that will all happen instead, just before the eve of the prize. So we will have the live podcast, we will have a mistress class with me and another writer, and we'll have live shortlist readings from some of the authors that you're going to hear from this evening. Hopefully, we're hoping that this delay might mean that we might have some more coming to the English shores. As I've just started this, the most huge thunderstorm has started in Sussex, and rain is now beating down on my windows. So if I suddenly short out, that's what's happened. One of the things that the Women's Prize does, as you know, we're now a charity, the Women's Prize Trust, and I thank you all both for your tickets that you've bought this evening. But if you do want to donate or have donated to us, we're really, really grateful. Obviously, at the moment, the more donations we get, the more of our charitable purpose we can fulfill. This year, we did Discoveries, which was a huge writing project to reach out to unpublished new writers of any age, any genre, any part of the country, anywhere, writing about anything that mattered to them. And we announced a shortlist of 16, and then a shortlist of a long list of 16, a shortlist of 6, and then our winner, Emma Van Straten, last week. All of the long-listed authors will be mentored by people from Curtis Brown Literary Agency, who is the partner in this, and it's powered by NatWest. We were thrilled that some 73% of the thousands of entries came from outside London, because that's the other part of the Women's Prize, which is to say to any woman, whoever she is, your voice matters. Your writing matters. Have a go. So we have had two amazing nights. We've heard from Britt Bennett and Susanna Clark on the first night, Claire Fuller and Yaa Gyasi last night. We've had readings from Ruth Nager, Jordan Stevens, Juliet Stevenson and Zoe Ashton. And tonight we have extraordinary readings from Jade Anouka and Hayley Atwell. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the two wonderful novelists who are the last two to be on the list. And they are Patricia Lockwood and Cherie Jones. And the one thing, somebody's pointed this out to me, that we have learned that this year, 2021, if you wanted to be on the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist, you needed to be in the first half of the alphabet. I'm just saying that for all of you writers out there, just think about that for next time. So without any further ado, let's start. And I'm delighted to begin this final evening of events, Cherie Jones. Cherie, if you could turn your camera on and join us. Her novel, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps a House, is her first novel. Both the novels tonight are first novels. But of course, Cherie is a very experienced writer anyway. She's won Short Story Award. She won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 1999. It is the most extraordinary book. It really, really packs a punch. It was one of those in the room where the judges were like, what about this bit? What about that bit? And we're going to be very careful this evening to not give anything away, because we've been very good at that. But Cherie, you're very, very welcome. Now, before we start talking, we're going to ask the amazing television actor and film actor Jade Anouka to read an excerpt from How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. Over to you, Jade.
Chapter 2. Mrs. Whalen, 26th of July, 1984. For the first 5 days after the murder, Mira Whalen is mute. She cannot speak when the maid says good morning. She cannot tell the swarming policemen to move their booted feet off the white carpet in her bedroom. She cannot say anything when the police insist on showing her photographs of all the robbers they know who were out of jail at the time of Peter Whalen's murder. She can only moan refusals. Don't come. Don't arrange for the body to be taken back to England just yet. Don't cry. When her mother calls with offers of assistance. But her voice is not the only thing that leaves her. On each of the 5 nights since the murder, Mira Whalen has also lost her teeth. And painless though it is, it fills her each time with an unexplainable terror as she dreams it. A terror that remains unabated on waking. It is often an ordinary dream, as dreams go, and walking the dog, washing the dishes, save that, before she knows it, her 2 front teeth tumble from her mouth and into her hands. Every night. In her dream, she is warned by a mental tearing away, devoid of physical sensation, that nevertheless compels her hands upwards until they reach her lips. She parts them slowly and feels the proof plop into her palms. It is always baby teeth, bloodless and tiny, the kind you might leave for the tooth fairy. Her Morphean self stares at these miniatures, whiter and more multifaceted than she remembers. And while she stares, the mental rending starts afresh. The central incisors in her palms are elevated, and there is the slow parting of lips and the silent crash of more of the teeth she hasn't owned since she was a mere little girl. What disturbs Mira Whalen most about these dreams is not the threatened loss of her ability to chew, but rather the fact that she often continues to stare at the teeth in her palm, even though she knows that more are to be lost. It does not matter to Mira that she is dreaming. Surely, she thinks on rising in the near morning, surely her sleeping version should be smart enough to foresee what will happen next, to do something to prevent the loss of more teeth. While Mira Whalen ponders the stupidity of her somnolent self, her sensible side repeats the same actions each morning on waking. She walks the 20 steps from the makeshift bed on the carpet behind the closed bedroom door to the mirror above the bathroom sink. There she takes 3 deep breaths before forcing herself to face the glass, at which point she watches her reflection bite the back of her hand, hard enough to mark it, and then examine each curve in the smarting impression. It is only after she has convinced herself that her real teeth are all grown up that she counts them every morning after the murder. She counts aloud, as counting her teeth in her head gives her the sensation of still being asleep, and the prospect of being a sleepwalker is the scariest thing of all. But today is the first day that her voice actually makes a sound. Her voice grates over her tongue and teeth and emerges from her mouth, a rasping thing that whispers even though she doesn't want it to. On each of the first 5 mornings after the murder, Mira Whalen considered it a blessing that she could not speak and wake the children even if she was so inclined. On this, the 6th morning, she chides herself for being so stupid as to still believe in blessings.
Cherie, welcome. I mean, such a fantastic reading from Jade. And hello, you're in Barbados, and I hope you haven't got a storm here. Before we actually start to talk about some of the inspirations, for those who have not yet read your incredible novel, could you just sum up in a few sentences the story and what your inspiration, why you first wrote it?
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and that was such a beautiful reading. I was really moved just listening to Jade. Yes, the book is essentially about a woman called Lala who braids hair on the beach in Barbados, and on the first time that we meet Lala in the novel, it's the night of the birth of her first child. On that same night, there is the murder of a wealthy tourist further along the beach. And the book is really about how the 2 events are connected. And when we take that journey with Lala, we learn a little bit more about, I think, a little seen side of paradise, a little seen side of Barbados, my homeland. which is not as, it's physically beautiful, but perhaps there are lots of other issues that these characters experience that we as readers get the benefit of experiencing along with them. So that's what the book is about.
It's for me, I read it as an incredibly beautiful, although violent and tough and dark story of love and loss and violence, and the kind of the dark underbelly behind the beautiful palm trees and the beaches, that it's the things people. So when Baxter's Beach is at the heart of things, and Lala you've already mentioned, when you started to dream the novel, was it Lala that came to you in the first place, or was it Baxter's Beach and the whole environment? Was it the small focus or the bigger, broader focus when you first started to think of the novel?
It definitely was the smaller focus. It was Lala who came to me first. I often say that, I usually get the inspiration for my stories from a character just popping into my head and speaking to me. So on that occasion, it was actually Lala who popped into my head. And she told me a story about a fight between herself and her husband over their baby. And we all know, those of us who've read the book know how that ends. And I found that story so compelling. I mean, it was just something I couldn't get out of my head. And I started writing that very night. I got the inspiration on the bus, heard Lala on the bus, and that was it. I started writing from there.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, that scene, for those of you who've not yet read, I mean, I when I read the novel, I read it in one gulp. That scene has stayed with me for months and months and months, because, you all have a treat, but not in a good way when, to read it. It's such an amazing scene. With the decisions that you make sort of moving out, you very successful short story writer. Did you find the kind of the breathing of a bigger novel, a whole novel, when you started writing? Did you think it was going to be a short story, or did you just know that Lala's story and her violent marriage, but also her love affair and all of these other things, could you just see it panning out from that moment, or did you just start writing and see where you went?
Actually, Kate, I didn't see it as anything other than a short story. I started thinking I was going to be writing a short story, because prior to that, I considered myself primarily a short story writer. And I thought I was going to be writing the story of that particular incident that I felt was relayed to me, that Lala told me about that night on the bus. But what I found was I wrestled with it a lot. I mean, perhaps more than, most of my writing before that. I found this a lot more difficult going. And then other characters started to pop up. So there were several times that, I was surprised by what I saw or heard of this story. And it was a little bit like exploring different rabbit holes, but then recognizing how things wove together and why it was necessary to tell this story in a much greater word space. So I think maybe about 2015, I recognized that what I actually was working on was a novel. And I went from there. I'm really glad that I did. But it did start as a short story.
We are very, very glad that you did as well. Something, obviously, I know that you've talked about before, and it's come up in some of the reviews, which have been wonderful, obviously, for the novel. You don't flinch from the violence. This is a world where women are routinely punch bags for the men around them, and other women don't always support them. So in terms of Lala's story, but also the cast of characters, the wonderful and rich cast of characters you build round, I think you do it superbly, because you don't make the reader turn away, but you make the reader take a deep breath. Was that a decision that you made, that you were not going to shut the door and let all of these things, the violence, happen behind closed doors? Or was it just that you had to be true to Lala and you had to be in the room with her?
So it was really important to me that the reader experience some of the violence that the female characters in the book do, especially Lala. But it was also really important to me to depict that violence in a different way. It was really important to me personally that it not be gratuitous. So it wasn't, you know, violence and gore for its own sake. I was more interested in the impact that that violence had on Lala psychologically, as well as, you know, the wider community. So it was important for the reader to come into that room with Lala and to have the door closed, and to have to experience it with her. But I wanted to be very careful in terms of how the reader experienced that and what they understood from those episodes. I definitely didn't want readers to be distracted by the physical horror of the violence suffered by the characters. So yes, it was a deliberate choice that the reader sit in on that violence, but perhaps how I tried to do a little differently.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely masterful, mistressful, the way you do it. You know, as a historical fiction writer, I'm often asked about how I write violence. And one of my reasons for writing quite detailed scenes, not a lot of them, but they are there, is that if the reader doesn't know the consequences of a character saying yes to something or no to something, what actually will happen to them, then you are disrespecting both the character, but in my case, the real history that happened. How can you, you know, and I think the way that you do it, which is in a horrifying way, or some of the descriptions are almost beautiful. The reader has to use her imagination or his imagination. Yeah, it's extraordinary feat. The last question before I bring Patricia in and we start to listen to her reading is, obviously, somebody's going to ask this, but I'm going to do it now. I'm going to have chair's privilege and I'm going to leap right in there. Tell us about the title. You know, tell us about the title, because it's a great title. It's a great title, but I can imagine your publishers going, what title is that? So tell us about the title.
Yes. So How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House really comes from the fable that appears at the beginning of the book. And it's a story that Lala's grandmother tells her when she is 13 years old about what happens to little girls who explore these dark tunnels in her neighborhood, in her village. And it's a story of two sisters, one of whom is good and the other is considered not good. And the bad sister goes ahead and explores the tunnels and is captured by a monster and loses an arm as a result. Now, when Lala hears this story, she is, of course, pretty defiant. And she says to her grandmother, you know, despite the fact that she's lost this arm, she can still get a husband, she can still have children, you know, she can still have a house. And her grandmother says to her, you know, silly girl, how's she going to sweep the house? And the rest of the novel is pretty much an answer to that question. How does the one-armed sister sweep her house? But I think at a deeper level, it is also a reference to how women are expected to function within the parameters of certain societies. So if we continually judge women by certain standards or restrict women in certain ways, and we have a woman who is not particularly inclined or equipped to self-realize within those parameters, you know, how does she survive? How does she triumph? And I hope that by the end of the novel, readers agree with me, or readers consider that perhaps survival or triumph for a woman within those circumstances is perhaps to be looked at differently, and that the standards by which women are judged and restrained are perhaps less relevant than we might think.
Yeah.
So that's the story of the title.
Yeah, I think absolutely the novel answers the question you ask, and you know, you want to say to Wilma, Lala's grandmother, there you go, There's the answer. Thank you so much, Cherie. That was completely fantastic.
you.
Don't go away.
No.
We will have you back in a moment. Thank you. So our 6th book on the shortlist this year is Patricia Lockwood's No One Is Talking About This. And before I bring Tricia to the stage, as it were, our virtual stage, here is a reading from the wonderful Hayley Atwell. Hayley, the stage is yours.
No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. She opened the portal and the mind met her more than halfway. Inside it was tropical and snowing, and the first flake of the blizzard of everything landed on her tongue and melted. Close-ups of nail art, a pebble from outer space, a tarantula's compound eyes, a storm like canned peaches on the surface of Jupiter, Van Gogh's The Potato Eaters, a chihuahua perched on a man's erection, a garage door spray painted with the words, "Stop, don't email my wife." Why did the portal feel so private when you only entered it when you needed to be everywhere? She felt along the solid green marble of the day for the hairline crack that might let her out. This could not be forced. Outside, the air hung swagged, and the clouds sat in piles of couch stuffing, and in the south of the sky there was a tender spot where a rainbow wanted to happen. Then 3 sips of coffee and a window opened. "I'm convinced the world is getting too full, lol," her brother texted her, the one who obliterated himself at the end of every day with a personal comet called Fireball. Capitalism. It was important to hate it, even though it was how you got money. Slowly, she found herself moving toward a position so philosophical even Jesus couldn't have held it, that she must hate capitalism while at the same time loving film montages set in department stores. Politics. The trouble was that they had a dictator now, which, according to some people, white, they had never had before, and according to other people, everyone else, they had only ever been having constantly since the beginning of the world. Her stupidity panicked her, as well as the way her voice now sounded when she talked to people who hadn't stopped being stupid yet. The problem was that the dictator was very funny, which had maybe always been true of all dictators. Absurdism, she thought. Suddenly all those Russian novels where a man turns into a teaspoonful of blackberry jam at a country house began to make sense. What had the beautiful thought been? The bright profundity she had roused herself to write down? She opened her notebook with a sense of anticipation she always felt on such occasions. Perhaps this would finally be it, the one they would chisel on her gravestone. It read, "Chuck E. Cheese can munch a hole in my you-know-what." After you died, she thought as she carefully washed her legs under the fine needles of water, for she had recently learned that some people didn't, you would see a little pie chart that told you how much of your life had been spent in the shower arguing with people you had never met. Oh, but like that was somehow less worthy than spending your time carefully monitoring the thickness of beaver houses for signs of the severity of the coming winter. Was she stimming? She feared very much that she was. Things that were always there. The sun, her body, and the barest riffling at the roots of her hair, and almost music in the air, unarranged and primary and swirling like yarns laid out in their colours waiting. The theme song of a childhood show where mannequins came to life at night in a department store. Anonymous History Channel footage of grey millions on the march. Shark-snouted airplanes, silk deployments of missiles, mushroom clouds. An episode of True Life about a girl who liked to oil herself up, get into a pot with assorted vegetables and pretend that cannibals were going to eat her, sexually. The almost formed unthought, is there a bug on me? A great shame about all of it. All of it. Where had the old tyranny gone? The tyranny of husband over wife. She suspected most of it had been channeled into weird ideas about supplements, or whether or not vinyl sounded warmer, and which coffee makers were nothing but a shit in the mouth of the coffee Christ. 100 years ago, you would have been mining coal and had 14 children all named Jane, she often marvelled. as she watched a man stab a finger at his wife in front of the Keurig display. 200 years ago, you might have been in a coffee shop in Göttingen, shaking the daily paper, hashing out the questions of the day, and I would be shaking out sheets from the windows not knowing how to read. But didn't tyranny always feel like the hand of the way things were? It was a mistake to believe that other people were not living as deeply as you were. Besides, you were not even living that deeply.
Tricia, welcome. I mean, the audience couldn't see, but it was just so wonderful watching you smiling and laughing as Hayley read from your amazing novel. And one of the things that is so fantastic about your novel is, and it's a first novel as well, even though obviously you've got a great pedigree as an essay writer and a comic memoir and a poet, is it's so unique and so ambitious and so full of risk and so funny, and everything about the novel is impossible to describe. So I'm going to ask you to describe the novel and tell us where it came from before I can even begin to ask you questions. For anybody who hasn't read it yet, you will never read a novel like this. It's quite wonderful.
That felt like a punt a little bit. It's like, I can't do this, so just take it away. Yes, I think you get a good flavor from Hayley's wonderful reading, and also her hair looked really good. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but like her hair looked really amazing. So the novel is in two parts, and I think it could be described as a fairly classic stream of consciousness novel. So that'll either pique your interest right away, or it like will put the novel to the very back of your to read list. There's two kinds of people. But in the first half of the novel, I would describe the protagonist as being stuck inside the internet. It's one long scroll really of her thoughts as she reads, and it's sort of written in bite-sized pieces. And in the second half of the novel, this endless scroll is interrupted by the emergence of real life, what feels like her real life. And a lot of the events in the second half of the book were based on my own experience. So if that is something that some people they don't know whether they can ask about that or not, or whether that's okay. So a lot of it was centered around my real experience. So the surprise of the second half of the novel came as I was writing it, and it came in my own real life as well.
That is so interesting. So does that mean that you had in your mind, you never name your narrator, and she's clever and arch, and she's become, you call it the portal rather than the internet, but she's become a sensation for particular tweets. And, the particular one is, can a dog be twins? Which actually, I then found myself actually thinking about, like, that's a really interesting question. But so were you not expecting to have a novel that was, on the one hand, this is the virtual world and everything is happening there, and then the collision with the real heartbreaking story that happens on the ground, as it were, away from the was that a surprise to you as you started writing?
What happened itself was a surprise. I knew that something else, when I began, I knew something else would come along, that it wasn't just going to be about the internet, that it wasn't going to be about being stuck in this place forever, because that wouldn't be a very uplifting novel, or one that was probably very fun to read. But I did have the sensation that it could have been written forever. As I went on and on, I was like, man, you really could write a version of this that just stretched and stretched and stretched and couldn't be contained between book covers. So yeah, I thought that there would be two parts, but I thought maybe, I tossed around a couple ideas. I thought maybe the other part would be set in outer space, and that is not what ended up happening. So in real life, I received a call or a text that was very similar to the one that the protagonist receives, and I had to go and be with my family and experience that sort of urgency with them.
I mean, I have to tell you this because everybody watching from all over the world is enjoying your cat. Your cat is back. Cat is noisy. Hey, the cat is right there. Yeah, I had to say that because obviously you didn't know and the rest of us did.
I did not know.
No. I mean, it's only fair. It's like, that's what women do for each other, right? So, it's behind you, behind you. But just staying with the incredible structure of the book and the ambition of the book, and I think it's wonderful. Somebody is asking if there was another novel that was shortlisted for the Booker Prize a couple of years ago called Ducks Newburyport, and it's so not like that novel, but at the same time there is an ambition in terms of form and structure which is so extraordinary. As you wrote, did you know how you were going to lay it out on the page and how you felt you needed to put the stream of consciousness down on the page for readers, or did you do that in an edit subsequently? I mean, how close to your original first draft is what we have here?
Yeah, it was really almost chosen for me just by the form that the portal writes in, is the way she talks about it in the novel. I mean, if we're experiencing reality inside of it in those bite-sized pieces, it only made sense to me to write it as a fragment novel. And I also had a background in poetry, and in poetry, we are very prone to that sort of experimentation. So it wasn't as new to me, I think, as it has been sometimes to people who have come to fragment novels more recently, readers who have come to them. They've been around for a long time. So I knew that it would speak that way, because I think that there's a coherence about the kind of fragment that is experienced only in its totality. When you're reading it all together, you do experience it as a narrative, and you're assimilating a lot of different pieces of information in other people's experience. So I wanted that to be present. I wanted it to read the way it does read, where it just feels like you're kind of slipping down this endless hole, and encountering these concrete facts as you go, and you can reach out and you can pluck one, and you can reach out and you can pluck one. So that was intact really almost from the very beginning.
And did you always know that you wanted to write a novel then? Because, you know, you've written an extraordinary essay, How Do We Write Now? And that answers, you know, in a way, some of the beauty of this novel is it seems like call and response, if we were in music, to that essay. But also you've written a comic memoir as well as poetry. So what was it that made you think, this is a novel? This is a novel, not a piece of performance poetry or an essay. I'm so interested in the form, you know, so many different forms.
It could have been anything, but it's true that I've kind of jumped around, like, you know, I've been leapfrogging between genres. And so I think I was always going to hit the novel at some point. This one was very specifically inspired. I was reading another novel when I got the idea. I was reading Rachel Ingles's Mrs. Caliban, which is an excellent novel that I recommend to everyone. But there was something just about the way she spoke about her day, you know, washing the dishes, hearing a broadcast on the radio. And I thought, we're hearing broadcasts on the radio. We're washing dishes. We're not washing dishes. We're getting on the internet. So I thought there's something you could do that was like that, that is, you know, the modern equivalent of a housewife, really stuck in her home. What is she doing? How is she experiencing the world? And that's how it began.
Yeah, and there's such a wonderful wry humor. But the other thing that I found the real life story of the family, and I won't say what happens because obviously everybody will be ordering the book immediately if they haven't read it. The details, ladies and gentlemen, are in the Q&A in the chat. But I found that real life story, the way that she comes out of the portal and then nothing, it can't be solved. It can't be solved by wry comments. It can't be made viral. The real thing that's happening is heartbreaking. And you write about that very beautifully and very, very, very warmly. Was that hard, since you've shared with us that this came from real experience? Was it a liberating thing to put some of that on the page, or was it actually quite hard to write that?
No, it wasn't difficult at all. It almost felt compulsive, actually, as if I couldn't stop doing it. And in a way, it's because I had spent the last few years writing about every single tick that I was going through as I went about my day. So why would I not write about this as well? But there's also something about that subject matter and those questions that is more natural to me than ironic observation. I was raised very religious. I was a very religious person growing up. And to me, there's something freeing to finally be standing in a room with those questions and saying, now I get to talk about life and death. Now I get to talk about, you know, blood and bone, the real things that matter to me when I'm alone in my room, because when I'm alone in my room, I'm not necessarily making ironic commentary. That's something I'm doing for other people. people. So if it feels like the second half of the book is a kind of explosion out of that irony, that's why. That's something I feel in my real person and in my real work.
Yes, and I must say, I love the way that the faith is absolutely sewn in to every part of the second part of the novel, but it's never about that. It's just there. I thought that was beautifully done. Final question before I bring Cherie back to the stage. Tell us about the title, because again, it's one of those titles that, you know, we've had some very, you know, loads of very different titles on this year's shortlist, but this is great. No one is talking about this, and that's, you know, in a way, it's a pun on the death of the portal and the internet. If nobody's talking about you, does it even exist? But just tell us how you chose the title. Was it always there in your mind?
This is the title that I started with, and it was kind of a meme, and it became more of a political thing as time went on. You would draw people's attention to a news story by being like, no one is talking about this, and in reality, you know, thousands and thousands and millions of people were talking about it. But I did try to change it at one point to something more classically lyrical. I tried to change it to People on the Sun. But they were like, no way, no, we're keeping, no one is talking about this, because then everyone in their reviews can be like, everyone is talking about it, and then you have this natural built-in handle that people can use. And then it turned out that Kazuo had written a Sun book, so it was very good
Clara and the Sun.
that I did not do that. Yeah, so keeping the original title was in fact correct.
but actually, it works so brilliantly because it's a title that is appropriate for the first half and the second half.
Yeah,
so
I think that's right. I do think it was the right title, and also I was trying to change it when I had coronavirus, so that may have influenced the decision somewhat. We don't know.
So yeah, exactly. So in a state of delirium. Thank you so much. We've got so many brilliant questions coming in. Cherie, if you're there, hooray! Come on down. As I feel we're now in a chat show. Come on down. Before I start going through the audience questions, which are just about to all be sent through to me, could I just ask both of you, I mean, Tricia, you just mentioned a particular book, but one of the things that everybody has been enjoying during these shortlist festival is to hear about books that inspire you or authors that inspire you. And we're putting together a library of those recommendations. So would you mind, starting with you, Cherie, maybe, who a writer inspires you, or writers, and are there any particular books that inspire you when you were writing One Armed Sister?
So there were no particular books that inspired me while writing One Armed Sister, but in terms of the authors that I love and who provided inspiration for me, there's so many. Earl Lovelace, The Wine of Astonishment is one of my absolute favorite novels of all time. He's a Caribbean writer from Trinidad. So Earl Lovelace, Olive Sr., also from the Caribbean, Timothy Callender, Jamaica Kincaid, Claude McKay, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Maya Angelou.
Oh, blimey. Well, I mean, you're doing brilliantly. I'm not sure the poor women behind the scenes at the Women's Prize, they're like, oh, you know, how many typewriters have we got?
But, I think I'll probably stop there then. But those are some of the writers who have inspired me and continue to inspire me, and whose shoulders I stand on.
It's brilliant, because what the Women's Prize has always tried to do is create an alternative library. You know, that not the library that we all get taught about. And it's Daisy that's been asking the question. Tricia, what about you? I know the cat's back.
I know, he's chewing on the cords. He's like, oh, there's snakes down here, Mom. I gotta kill the snakes. Now, tidbit though, he is the cat in the book. So he has been renamed Dr. Butthole, because that is his personality, to be a doctor of butthole science. And he's the one. So he's the one who's always on my Zooms for some reason. So I have been asked this many times, and I never feel like my answer is exactly honest, because it's true. You are reading things while you're writing these books, but you're not necessarily deriving inspiration. And a lot of times the people I reread are people that you could never find the evidence of in my work. I reread A.S. Byatt almost constantly, and it's like, am I going out and like describing snail research on the moors? No, I'm not. Is this like a Laurentian exploration of, you know, like being touched up on a bus? No, it isn't. And yet I read those books all the time. But when I was writing about this one, I was thinking about people like Rachel Ingalls. And I was also thinking about people like David Markson. So I was in the field of poetry poetry as well. And I was thinking too of sort of like the really interior exploratory novels, things like Our Sister Killjoy and things like that. There's like people on travels, people butting up against strange circumstances, things that are very much inside the mind. So I looked broadly, but then also what was I actually reading at that point in time? And that was like the big grand book of the internet, right? That was the big one.
Yeah. So Cassie asked to both of you, she said, I found both books so emotional to read and beautifully handled, but I'd love to know how it was to navigate writing such emotional scenes. Was it difficult or overwhelming? Cherie?
I actually have to admit that it was for me. Personally, there were points in time when I just had to put the manuscript down for a bit and kind of get away from it, and then come back to it. It was difficult, I think, because of my own experiences. It made it that more wrenching to write. But I think it was also empowering, because of some of the choices I was able to make in terms of how I conveyed it. So I have to say, yes, it was wrenching for me at points in time. And the way I dealt with that, like I said, was to put it down when it became too much, and then to delight in the fact that I had the power to make certain choices in terms of how I told the story.
Tricia?
Yeah, it was incredibly emotional for me as I was writing the second half particularly. I remember it, and it's maybe a strange fact about this book, but I wrote a lot of it on my phone and like on my iPad. So a lot of it was just like written with one finger. I'm just like sitting there tapping, and tears are just streaming down my face, not even in a way, I'm not making ugly faces or anything like that, but it was just like this release that was continual as I was writing. And the thing that I found the most difficult was not to try to modulate that in any way. When I would go back and I would edit parts of the first half, I would feel this desire to cut all of these like raw, vulnerable bits of the second part, and you couldn't do that because that's what the novel was about. But there was still this turtle shell that wanted to descend to protect these feelings, when really the novel is about how we are unprotected in those situations. And it really like opens your skin up to the universe in a way. Like you want to be showing that you can't cut those things out.
Yeah, it's very, when I have difficult scenes to write, I take them out of order. I don't like the way that it changes how I feel when I'm writing. So quite often, because I write historical fiction and there's often battles, but particularly torture and things like that, I kind of put them all to one side and do them in one go. I decide I'm going to pollute myself on this day and get them in there rather than it being a shadow over everything else. Cherie, Lois says, how, if at all, did your day job as a lawyer inform your novel?
That's a question that I get a lot.
Do you? That's interesting.
Yes, actually not very much, other than I think my ability to interrogate some of the characters. I like to say that, I walk around a lot of the time with voices in my head. Don't hold it against me. But often the ones who talk to me and tell me stories don't tend to tell me the truth at all the time. So, in the process of writing, I'm asking questions. I'm asking questions of the characters. I'm asking questions of myself. Sometimes I'm doing research to try to get a better understanding of people's motivations for things, and to ask all these questions. I think being a lawyer or my legal training helps with that. But other than that, it's almost as if they use different parts of the brain. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, you've got a very big brain, clearly. So Tricia, this is for you from Jill, who asks, what do you think about the impact social media has on women's self-worth in particular? There's a great bit in the book about women of the past limping on broken arches, which suggests you have some opinions.
Well, I don't know that I do. It's more, I think that social media kind of performed a trick where it seemed like a vehicle for empowerment at first, even just in the way that we spoke and wrote about ourselves. So there was something like the personal essay industrial complex we talk about a lot now, now that we can see it a little bit as it was. And that's basically where women were encouraged to really write about the rawest, most intense things that had happened to them, and to sort of like offer them up in this marketplace for human consumption. And it was empowering to people to read those things. And it was, I think, for a while, a way to stand there and show ourselves and achieve some sort of unity and talk to other women about these things. And it was also commodified as well. I mean, you see that with movements, and you see the language taken from us and turned into marketing speak and that sort of thing. So I do think it was that for us for a while. What I'm talking about when I talk about, you know, broken arches, or, you know, husbands of the past who are sitting in their coffee shops and we don't know how to read, is that you don't feel the strictures of the time as strictures necessarily. I mean, this is the great thing. You're a writer of historical fiction. This is what you understand. A lot of times people do feel themselves to be free, when in no other circumstance would people from the outside look at their lives and see them to be so. So it isn't a commentary about, you know, what women of the past underwent especially, but just this perpetual condition where we're all strapped and stayed in some way, and we don't realize it at the time, and we'll even defend those strictures to other people who point them out to us.
Yeah, great answer, thank you. Cherie, Constance says, you touch on generational trauma, and she was devastated as Lala gets caught up in a harmful reenactment of abuse with Aidan as she deals with loss. How did you manage to put this on the page so well?
I think that's something that I've observed nearly all my life. It was something that occurred to me as a young girl growing up, and it's an observation that has persisted in terms of how trauma moves through generations, and how the attitudes and approaches to an acceptance of violence against women especially is almost reinforced by women generation to generation. So even for Lala, I think some of her choices are influenced by the choices she has seen her mother make, or she's recognized that her mother made, or the choices that her grandmother Wilma has made before her. So for me, I think my depiction of that came from my own observation and experience. And that definitely found its way into the book and into Lala's story.
Yeah, and the truth telling of, you know, the patterns that follow within families. It's not as simple as just saying, well, I'm not going to be like that. It carries on. Yeah. Tricia, Eric asks, this is a huge question. This is not just you as a novelist question. What are your thoughts on the end point of social media? Do you think it will just get more and more powerful, or do you think people will get sick of the lack of privacy and leave? That's not really you as an artist. That is you as the world.
I mean, we haven't gotten sick of the lack of privacy yet. I mean, every small bit of privacy that we have ceded, we have done so willingly and happily, you know, in almost all cases. So I don't know. I think that there's a lot to be said for the fact that the Twitter was extended beyond its natural lifespan. Like, we all kind of lingered there a lot longer than we should have, because Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. And that was, in a sense, his office. And he ruled from there, and he issued pronouncements from there. So we all stuck around a lot longer than I think we naturally would have. I think we would have moved to other places if that hadn't been the case. But I don't know what it will be. I mean, it's going to be inside our minds. It's going to be inside our fingertips. You know, the networks that form between people are going to be flying through the air in like laser blue lines. I don't know what it's going to look like, but maybe you can write a novel about it, Eric. But it won't be a finalist for the Women's Prize, or it could be. I mean, we don't know.
We're not even going to go there, actually, but I am going to ask, Cherie, this is quite an interesting question from Suzette, and she's asking, did you have any hesitancy of airing the dirty laundry? of the Caribbean.
Oh.
I was wondering whether to ask that or not, because we've had that quite a, Andrea Levy, the wonderful late Andrea Levy, who was an enormous part of the prize long before she won it, actually. But she was often asked that about shining a light into communities that were not often put on the page. So where her responsibility was, and I know what her answer was, but I'd be interested to know what your answer is.
So my responsibility and my loyalty as a writer, as far as I'm concerned, is to the story.
Yeah.
I am not particularly concerned with portraying Barbados, the place that I'm from and that I love with all my heart, always in a positive light. It's simply not the truth. And I'd like to think that my fiction tells the truth in that sense. So for me, I didn't have a concern about that. I think I told the story of these characters in this setting as it needed to be told. I told the story that I was given and that I was meant to tell. And that is a reality for many people who live in Barbados. And I don't think that shining a light on that story should be viewed negatively at all. I think it's wonderful to be able to hold a mirror up to some of our experiences and some aspects of our existence that are worthy of examination. So I had no qualms about it at all. I haven't had any backlash for it, and I'm happy that it turned out that way.
Well, Suzette, who asked the question, is saying, I agree with you. I'm so pleased you did this. So she's one of the things that I think it sounds counterintuitive, but when I was setting up the prize, I kept having to say to people, but don't you understand, because all the shortlisted authors are women, they're free to be artists. Because it's the one thing you can't say, oh, well, that's the book by the woman. And it extends particularly for if you come from a community that's very rarely represented. So Suzette, who asked the question, is cheering you on from the outside. One of the things that several people are asking, which I think is really, it's a question worth asking. You're not first-time writers, either of you, but these are debut novels. And how, if at all, has the enormous success of your debut novels influenced you moving forward to your next creative project? So have you been able to write? Are you spending too much time, hanging out with me on the internet, talking about your books and when you should be at your desk? What about that, Tricia? Have you been able to move on to the next thing? I know you've had COVID, so that's not helped either.
It didn't help, no. But it was also fruitful in a way, because I had a lot of my COVID symptoms were neurological, and when all of that was when it was happening and right afterwards, when I was psychotic after COVID, I kept these notebooks because it is my habit to keep notebooks. And so I have all this material of this time that I'm going to be glad to be able to work from, that I'm going to be glad to be able to remember. A lot of it feels as if it wasn't written by me, as if I wasn't even inside my body. And this was probably true for a lot of people who were inside a lot during the last year. There were many people who weren't, who didn't even have, the luxury to be protected from this illness. But a lot of people were inside, and I think that was very alienating for a lot of people. Like, it alienated us, not just from each other, but from our own bodies. We felt strange in our own homes, walking our own floorboards. It felt strange. So I did move on. I moved on into those notebooks, and I moved on into some short fiction. So I really am doing the thing where I'm ticking off genres, and I'm like, let's see what happens with this one. Maybe, let's see. I don't know what's going to happen next, but short fiction for now.
Cherie, we've already established, you have a whole career as a lawyer. Now you've got this extraordinary first novel. So what are you working on? Have you been able to work?
Yes, so interestingly enough, for me, before the novel, there was a period of time between when I finished the novel and when it was actually released. And I did start on other projects, in that time. So when the novel came out, I was actually already working on something. I really got deeply into flash fiction. So I'm working on a collection of flash fiction at the moment, and I'm also working on a new novel. I will say that after the release of this one, I think my writing did slow down a little bit. I'll admit to that. It's been pretty busy, but it's a compulsion. I have to do it. Even if I do it a little more slowly, I have to do it. So I am working on 2 other projects at the moment.
I do absolutely love the fact that I'm talking to you guys together this evening because of the alphabet and your surnames, but actually you have a great deal in common, even though your novels could not be more different in some respects. So a final question. I mean, we've got so many, but as always, we're running out of time. You've both been so incredibly open with your answers. It's fabulous. Thank you. But this is quite an interesting question. Do either of you have a reader in mind when you're writing? You know, have you got the person? So when I pick this up, you give it to me. You know, who's on the receiving end? Or obviously your book as well, Cherie. I'm not going to do both because, you know, we understand it's just a mime.
I don't. And I don't know if that's unusual. I don't know if it's strange. People ask me that question and I think I should make some guy per se. It's like, oh, George Washington or I don't know, some like historical figure, something like that, but I don't. But neither do I feel like I'm sending it just out into space or something. It's a very real feeling to me of sending out a line and not knowing where it's going to land. I mean, you don't know where the end of the book is going to be, but beyond that, you don't know where it's going to land in the reader. You don't know the trajectory of it into the universe. I think it's good not to know that. I mean, I think it can go farther when you don't know.
Cherie?
I don't have anybody in mind either. I think when I'm writing, I am less concerned with, you know, writing it in a way that any one reader or any set of readers will appreciate or understand it. My loyalty by the time I get to the later phases of the writing process is just to the story. So I'm just telling it best I know how, based on my understanding of the story that I'm telling. So I would say no as well. I'm not writing with any particular person in mind.
Yeah, I don't think many novelists do, actually, because then that shuts your gaze down, doesn't it? Because you're kind of then trying to please this ironically fictional person, and it stops you doing well. Look, you have both been absolutely wonderful this evening. They are extraordinary novels, and as I say, it's very odd how well that you fit together talking about them, which you wouldn't know. But I think people listening will be incredibly inspired I think this thing about ambition, I think, is so important. I think many writers sometimes feel that they must follow a certain sort of path in order to be successful, whereas actually you've both staked a territory, and I think that, you know, long may that last. And I think we can't wait to see whether it's flash fiction or a play, or you're going to be, next we'll know you're collaborating with the cat together, you know, who knows what's going to happen. I'm so sorry that we've got to finish this evening, but this is the end of the Women's Prize for Fiction Shortlist Virtual Festival, 3 nights. The audience, all of you, thank you so much. You've been fantastic. You've been sharing all your comments as well, backwards and forwards. Everything in the chat box, even all the writers that Cherie mentioned are in the chat box, but the books as well. Obviously, all the 6 novels are available to buy, and please do share them and shout about them, because it's a fantastic list. And the one advantage about the fact that we've had to delay our announcement to the 8th of September is that you all have no excuse now to not read the entire shortlist. I couldn't go without saying a huge thank you to our sponsors, NatWest and Bailey's, to all of our partners, to everybody at the Women's Prize team, Jen and Rosie and Claire, particularly Jen and Rosie in particular, and Alex, who's been on the tech duty, who's made this festival possible. Everything that you want to know about writing, if you are a new writer and you would like to enter the Discoveries programme, we'll be doing a call for entries in September for 2022, and all of that is on the website, as well as many other recommendations about amazing writing by incredible women. So for now, whatever you're reading, as long as it's on the shortlist, enjoy it. Share the books, pass them on, and do come to the 7th of September for the live shortlist readings, which will be in London, and the various other events. And then on the 8th of September, the 26th Women's Prize for Fiction winner will be announced. And all I can tell you, it will be one of those 6 books. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. A huge thank you to Cherie and to Patricia. You've been fantastic. And to the cat who's come back at the right moment to be waved off. And until we do this again next year, see you soon. Thank you and good night.